Welcome to a very special episode of the Checkup. This week we had a chat with Jason, the field CTO here at CHEQ, and Sanyo Gita, the Chief Privacy Officer at Privacent, and we talked all about the DPDPA Privacy Act in India, and more specifically, what that means for Indian businesses and the consumers and customers that interact with those businesses. This is a great one this week. I hope you enjoy. I took a lot from this. I hope you do too. Let's jump right into it. What is the DPDPA, and can you explain that to us and the viewers here today?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So DPDPA, which is called as the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which was enacted in August 2023. And it has been 2 years from the enactment, and we are awaiting the rules. And as we are talking today, doing this particular podcast, we just got to hear from our the Ministry of Information Technology, the Minister Ashwin Vaishnav sir, that the rules would be out before 28th of September 2025. And the timeline that probably we all are assuming that we would get for the implementation timelines would be around 2 years, that we all are anticipating, and we should be getting that, which probably GDPR also gave the similar time frame for compliance. And that is what we all in India are expecting, that because the Indian organizations will also require that much to get into compliance, right? So definitely it's an amazing legal framework that's balancing between individual rights to privacy and need for businesses to process personal data lawfully and for the purposes that are mentioned. So that is all about DPDPA from India. But yeah, definitely there are lots of key definitions and principles that the law is based upon. So as other regulations, privacy regulations are based upon the principle, similarly, this regulation is also a principle-driven regulation, wherein we have principle of data minimization, accountability, everything that the law is talking about. Would like to touch upon very quickly some of the key definitions, right? In terms of, we call the individual whose data is being processed as data principal, and the equivalent is data subject in GDPR. The entity that's determining the purpose and means of processing personal data, we call them as data fiduciary, whereas GDPR calls them data controller. So fiduciary are the one like a trust, an organization whom you can trust upon. And definitely personal data is same as the GDPR also says, any data about individual who's identifiable in relation to any data. So those are the major differences in terms of terminologies. But yeah, definitely there are other differences also when it comes to the legitimate use or the legal basis of processing, right? GDPR believes into legitimate use as a basis of processing, whereas DPDPA talks about consent, and it should be more consent-driven. So we all call it more as a consent-driven regulation. So yeah, there is lots of technological re-engineering that Indian organizations will be coming across, right? Because of the consent change that will be required. Yes, Jamie. So that is a very high-level view on DPDPA.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very, very insightful and informative. And there's a lot of things you were touching on in that that remind me a lot of GDPR, of course, and every other law that's come out globally over the past 10-ish years or more. And I just want to throw it over to you, Jason, because that's something that's super interesting to me, is like what other patterns are emerging globally and how this seems to, based on what we just heard, align with a lot of those existing privacy laws and what's coming out. So can you jump into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been operating in the space for quite some time at this point, and we've seen the rise of various privacy legislation across different geographies, and obviously the king, the OG of all of them was GDPR. And what we see a lot in terms of how these laws arise, right, is that GDPR still serves as kind of the master framework for a lot of the thesis of other laws coming online. But the difference that we often see is, in terms of how upfront consent needs to be, what are legitimate reasons to imply consent, and also what technologies have to be under scrutiny and what activities have to be under scrutiny. So a good example of this in one of the first other legislations that came online after GDPR was CCPA. And with CCPA, when we saw that, right, it wasn't so much, it still tried to address a lot of the concerns of GDPR, but it tried to do it by focusing on data sharing. It tried to focus on opt out rather than opt in. And then also, it did try and carve out more allowances for companies to collect data. Now, with recent updates, obviously with CPRA and stuff like that, that's become a little more restrictive. But you see similar patterns emerge in Japan, Brazil, Canada. So this isn't like a one-off, right? And what you see a lot of these environments try to navigate is kind of like the scope of, hey, how can I maximize the individual's ability to enact their privacy rights, but also still support a business's ability to leverage data for its operations? And I think this is the interesting thing about the Indian Act is it has seemed to have looked at how some of these other regulations were initially rolled out, especially in the UK and in America. In the EU and America. And what I mean by that is, one thing that really stuck out to me with draft rules was that it's often more prescriptive in terms of what you need to do, right? It's not as kind of ambiguous as GDPR or CPRA or CCPA was, where there was rough descriptions of data and activities, but ultimately the nuance always emerged through court rulings and stuff like that. Here, there's a lot more definitive recommendations on what to do, under what criteria you need to do it, and stuff like that. Now, the cool thing about all this, though, is like when you step back and look at all these upcoming regulations, stuff online and not online, you see just universal commonalities, right? So it's not like this is dramatically different than what you've experienced already. The difference is more, what I would kind of say is like the configuration, right? Everything is going to require some level of consent, some level of like suppressing or preventing data collection or allowing data collection, what data is allowed to be collected. It's just more, what are the settings in India versus Canada versus California, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a really good layout, and thanks for that kind of global overview and how this fits into it. So we've talked about, what DPDPA is. Now we talked a little bit about how that fits into the current global sphere, if you will, of privacy laws. And I just want to jump a little bit more on the tactical side of things so that maybe some of our listeners or some of the viewers can kind of understand it from their perspective, and really just kind of jump into some of these use cases and those conversations, and the current state of affairs, if you will. So one thing that I'd like to start off with and ask about is, we know in this industry that privacy is it's not just a cookie banner. Obviously, it's your entire privacy plan. It's how do you comply? How do you follow up? How do you go with auditing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to touch on the cookie banner misconception, because when you talk to people about privacy, that's usually the first thing that comes up for people that aren't in the privacy world but might be running a website or on the marketing team, et cetera. So the cookie banner misconception. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think we live in this tick the box culture, for lack of a better term, where you might show up to a website, see a cookie banner, and just go like, yeah, click the box. Okay, cool, I'm compliant. And I think there's a misconception around it being that's it, that's all, I'm done. So I don't know if one of you wants to just jump in and start talking a little bit about that.
Sure. Let me take a first whack at it, and then Sangeeta, I definitely have some questions for you in regards to how this pattern is emerging in India as well. But what we saw when, say, GDPR or CCPA came online, right, was a general pattern of the first level of understanding was, hey, we need to update our terms of use. We need to update our privacy policies, maybe throw up a cookie banner, letting people know that, we are leveraging cookies, or even giving them an opt-out, but it's the technology vendor's responsibility to honor that opt-out, not myself as a data controller to make sure that's enforced, right? And then there's even more nuanced things, right? Where we started to see even in Europe, right? Where you see the nuance between different geographies within Europe have specific requirements or suggestions for how to treat the language in a consent banner and stuff like that, where you realize like, oh, even down to that, those have to do take into account very different things. Like, you know, if you look at a consent banner in Germany, it's going to be very different than, say, France. And so with that, right, we saw the market eventually mature to go from this idea that, hey, privacy is this back office thing, you know, just like any other regulatory environment. It's just for the lawyers to do, and then, you know, they'll update some stuff, we'll post it on the website, and we'll go on with life, right? Over the course of a year or two, we saw that like, hey, everybody has to come to the table, because this isn't just a legal thing, right? This actually changes how we do business. And so one of the risks we saw emerge across like some of the client base was like, hey, there is real regulatory exposure when you just like have the banner up, but you don't actually do anything, right? Because once you get popped by, you know, the ICO or whatever corollary in whichever geography there is, you suddenly are like kind of operating within red tape. So if you're already concerned about not being able to operate well under the context of GDPR or CPRA or whatever, you just made your life a lot worse by trying to avoid it in the first place and then getting caught, right? Whether it was intentional or not. And then, you know, the one awesome thing I really think a lot of these legislations do is they also take a focus into security, right? So in the case of like, hey, breach notifications, letting people know something happened, making sure that they take into account and watch their identity and make sure that that's being protected, right? And that also, when like, you know, companies didn't honor those things, right, it did result in a large erosion of trust. And again, we saw over time that companies that were originally resistant to some of these legislations coming online suddenly came around, because they saw both that there are real consequences to not following them, but also there are real benefits to actually conforming to them when it comes to how the public views you. I don't know, are you seeing kind of that same transition throughout India as DPDPA comes online and the Indian market becomes more understanding or aware of it? Or are we seeing kind of like, hey, you know, India is a global market already, they already operate in these markets, they already knew what to go on to right away?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. The India market is picking up on the consent mechanism as a whole. And definitely, cookie consent compliance is the first thing that I feel that the regulator sitting probably in a digital office, in a digital sphere, would be first seeing on for the organization's compliance status, right? Because that is the only thing that the regulators can see sitting away from your organization without even entering your organizations, right? And the regulation is making it very clear that it has to be an explicit consent. So definitely the opt-in model has to come in, and it cannot just be something that is put up on probably something that's static and put on a website, or probably which is not having an integration with within the other particular websites that an organization will be having, because we have something called as consent managers, right? And probably this particular individual's example, an individual, I'm going on some particular website, giving my consent, right? Cookie consent, right? I'm giving an opt-in there. And probably I'm going on another website of the same organization, probably some co-brand of that particular organization. And I'm giving a consent there also on a next page or probably somewhere. So there needs to be probably a centralization, or probably way wherein this consent can come on one particular platform, and the person who's managing the data principal withdrawal rights or something like that, they can see, okay, if I have given consent at one place or two places or multiple places, right? So I think so, yeah, there needs to be a lot into consent manager piece, the cookie consent manager and the whole larger consent manager piece, the technicalities that needs to be part of it, right?
Gotcha. Are you seeing organizations though kind of looking at the idea of consent as just kind of like in the same pattern we saw in Europe, where like the first version of a lot of this stuff was like, hey, just pop open a notice or drop some cookies on the page with like their relevant consent settings? Or is this more like the first pass of DPDPA, where as organizations pick it up, we're seeing like, kind of the more mature approach right out the gate, right? Where they're actually restricting the use of technologies or restricting data based off consent? Or like, is that still kind of a learning process in the market right now?
No, it is absolutely, it's matured market now because we already had GDPR 7 years into the journey, and organizations, for example, even in India, right, they're already compliant to a level to GDPR. So the next level has to be more mature, right? So market in privacy domain here in India is also quite matured in terms of understanding of the concept, how it needs to be implemented, right? So it cannot be just that, okay, I put in a consent banner and I'm done, right? But yeah, there needs to be, whether it's a marketing cookie, is it a functional cookie, right? Which cookie am I opting into? Because previously it was just one kind of a cookie that we were accepting all cookies and it's done, right? But now you have to have segmentation into these cookies. There needs to be, whether it's just the first party cookie or the second party cookie or the third party cookie that we are accepting going ahead. So yeah, there is lots of maturity, that shift in the approach. The consent is being seen in the larger market.
Gotcha.
That's a really good insights.
Yeah. So I think, that helps me understand a lot of, at least like how the Indian market's starting to come online under their new privacy legislations, which it is kind of interesting to see, right? Because like, and it makes sense that, the Indian market, again, like the main other markets they participate in, America and Europe, right? If you're already having a keen understanding of GDPR or CCPA, CPRA, it does kind of follow that when DPDPA comes on, you already have a more heightened understanding of that legislation, right? One of the other things, sorry, I know you probably were going to go on this, Jamie. I'm just going to steal your thunder here. But one of the other things that I noticed when we were starting to work with a lot of organizations is there's this friction around adopting some of these rules, right? Because when you look at from revenue-facing teams, they would look at it from the perspective of like, hey, I'm going to lose all my data. How do I work? What do I do? And there would be stuff like where, oh, well, I don't want to buy a tool because like I'd rather still just invest all my money into like lead gen tool, advertising, et cetera, right? So you saw kind of resistance to like real adoption, but also you saw limitations to how much investment an organization was willing to make into this type of initiative, right? And what we kind of saw was like a short-term friction versus long-term gain type combat, right? You would have some folks that maybe would slap on like a couple like rules to say, hey, like if user opted out of analytics, turn off all my analytics. But then like you're like, all right, that's good enough. The advertising guys don't care about anything. They don't collect anything, right? What do they know? And so you'd see like I guess maybe potential shortcuts made like that. Also, the idea of using privacy and trust as a brand value, or even like trying to conform to global standards, right? Where they would start to realize like, hey, rather than having to be surgically aware of what's happening in Germany versus France versus California, if we just start operating with these standards globally, then it's actually a lot easier for us to conform to kind of one mode of operation, rather than like saying like, oh, we could collect all the data in one market but not the other, right? And that was like, from a strategy perspective, that was also a big maturity and growth observation that we made from a lot of the organizations we work with across the globe, right? And again, like, same kind of thing. Is this kind of similar patterns that you're seeing in India? Like, do you see that where, obviously we want to be compliant, but like the business can be resistant to it because they're kind of scared with operating with minimal data and stuff like that? Or have they kind of already seen like, hey, no, it's okay, we have other ways to work, right? We don't really need this, or we'll take the data we can get, but like, we're going to do some other smart things. And, if they have, what might some of those other smart things be?
Yeah, so absolutely. So they will try to figure out a way out to work with data, right? As you rightly said, that there would be a lot of resistance from the business owners when it comes to implementation. I'll give you a very classic example. I was working with one of our clients recently, and when it came to implementing the cookie code, the cookie consent banner that pops up, the code into the website, right? There was so much resistance that was seen from the client marketing team, the business function owner, that my footfall of the customer will go down if I put my banner in such a format, right? It is starting from there. The resistance from the business owners is starting from the point, if I put a banner on a complete bottom of a website, my footfall on the website will fall so much. If I give them like a few seconds to go and opt into a consent, this is the fall in my customer footfall will happen on my website, right? The traffic footfall. Then, okay, just put up a small square banner on the left corner, which is like a small, very tiny banner, so that the customer is not impacted when he's coming to the website. So there will be lots of challenges. Probably these are the very small challenges that we are seeing when it's coming to implementation or putting up a code on these particular websites. Just imagine when we just tell them, oh, the person is saying no to your marketing cookies, you can't put those cookies down there. So just imagine the quantum of resistance that will start coming in. These are with some mature players that we're already working around putting cookie consent banners, and this is the response that we are getting from them, right? It's just right now on the marketing side or probably the footfall side. But when they'll not get actual data, if somebody is not consenting to, imagine the rage that they will be facing, right? They'll be doing. So absolutely, it is just starting in India, right? So this discussions with the business owners and the technology teams, the fight is gonna start, and the privacy teams. So I was on the privacy team side trying to implement, and the resistance from the marketing as well as the business function owner and the technology team that's coming in. I can't tell you how we probably handled that situation. And finally, I'll tell you, they just agreed to a small box on the left corner. They said, no, we are not going to put a large banner on the website that's going to impact our SEO and other things, lots of things that the technical terminology they started using. And yeah, so that is there. But yeah, absolutely, we have to ensure that we're creating a privacy aware culture with lots of training awareness to these business functions owner and the technology owners who will be implementing it on the ground. Yeah, this is to be done, right? This code has to be implemented, or if the person is not consenting to it, you are not going to get this analytical data of when he came, when he logged out and things like that, right? So yeah, we'll have to have these vocal champions who will be working around okay, by privacy by design frameworks within the organization, and the product development from the very first line of the code that will be done.
No, yeah. I mean, I guess some things never change, right? Even though the market's more mature, you still feel the business, like, the revenue facing orgs, somewhat resistant to to kind of pursuing the standard, even though they're kind of aware of what it means, right? But like, it also makes sense, right? I get it from those guys' perspective, right? Your job is measured by revenue, right? Your job is measured by like how many eyeballs you attract, how many things you actually get someone to buy, right? So it is like, it is a daunting idea that, like, hey, I might put something on my site that might lower my visitors, or even if it doesn't lower my visitors, I may not know who my visitors are. So I'll have to like learn who my audience is from different ways, right? So it is a pattern that we saw across pretty much all our customer base, right? And even like more broadly in the market, right? Where you see folks very scared of just losing data, and then if not losing data, also, trying to understand how can I work in an environment where I can only really rely on the data that I have, right? Or my partners or my advertising or my marketing partners, they will only be able to get a cohort of data, right? Or even other strategies such as like, how can I convince a user to opt in, right? Those were a lot of the big questions that we saw companies navigate and still navigate to this day. But like at the same time, like I will say there have been some interesting results to it too, right? Like, I'm sure for any of us that have traveled in like the last year or two, right? Suddenly you notice like, hey, you sign up for that airline's frequent flyer program, you get free internet, right? Like, they're starting to give giveaways just to get you to say like, just Jamie, tell me who you are. So when next time you come in, you've already logged in. I don't need to guess who you are. Just by logging in, you're giving me a little bit of consent already, so I can do some basic tracking on you right out the gate. At least I got something for it, right?
That's it. It's definitely a very familiar song and dance, isn't it? As you were
Yeah,
talking, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's exactly what we go through and have been going through for the past, decade or so in North America and everything else. But it's interesting that you touch on it too, where I think this maybe where you were going, Jason, is kind of that trust factor as well as like building trust, and that can take time, of course, with those marketing teams or those revenue-based teams, and also the consumers that are coming to the website as well. And I think there's that fear. Just got to get over that fear on the business side with those revenue generating teams of saying, your analytics might change a little bit, but at the end of the day, these will be more engaged consumers potentially, people that want to be there, people that are more interested in hearing what your business and your company has to say, and will ultimately in the long run be part of your entire, revenue generating strategy.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
the other option is like, I usually also like to just kind of point out you might save some money on the other side of this too. If like, your analytics hits go down by 20%, you don't need that same contract size. Um, But one of the other things that I noticed, and this is one that like we're still seeing the conversation navigate even across the existing markets, right? Kind of a process versus controls type approach, right? And kind of what I mean by that, right, is a lot of times when we saw legislation come online and stuff like that, right? Whether it was related to privacy or even stuff like can spam or COPA, stuff like that, right? A lot of it was process driven, right? Legal would set up a process, some GRC flow in the back. You would have like an email or whatever to kick off that process. It was very human initiated, right? And then even stuff that involved like having some controls around how we, or not even controls, rules around how we actually conducted our business on a day-to-day basis, right? You would have like manual reporting, humans like kind of like providing like an audit report to your chief legal or compliance officer and saying like, hey, look, here are all the activities we conducted based on and in within the boundaries you've defined, right? But when you come to this side of the world, we're talking about the user experience. We're talking about the websites, your mobile devices. These are not slow environments, right? Stuff changes fast. This is the place where you experiment. This is the place where you'll throw out new ideas. And a lot of times we see companies kind of get burdened by this idea of process versus controls, right? So, to give the audience a quick highlight of like what that may look like, right? There's the DSAR flows, right? Where it's like, hey, can I automate some of these integrations into all the data sources I can go to, or is it kind of a manual thing, right? And what's that worth to me? But probably more intensely is like, say, your day-to-day marketing or tagging activities, right? Oh, someone wants you to wire up tracking on these buttons. Someone wants to set up ad pixels on these landing pages because you just onboarded a new ad campaign partner, stuff like that, right? And when you go through a process-driven approach, right, what that may look like is, hey, Jason, when you wire that up, make sure that these 6 tags always look to see if like this cookie is set correctly. And if it is, then go ahead and fire it. If not, don't do it, right? And then, you'll have somebody check like once a week, once every couple of weeks, hey, are these rules set up? They look right, maybe they're not right, right? And then you have the controls-based approach, right, where this is like kind of like akin to what we saw like in the IT landscape with firewalls or whatever else, right? Where it's here's a set of rules. These are the rules that every technology in the page will follow. If they try and follow it, they'll just be terminated, right? And when you, as an organization, right, it's not that process is a bad thing, but sometimes like it can be cumbersome, right? So this is where we see how do organizations decide which approach to take, right? And like the common patterns I've seen is like folks that don't necessarily have like a large digital presence, right? Your website may be just more akin to a billboard, right? Your main forms of engagement are like having in-person activities or having someone just call you on the phone. You probably can get away with the process-based approach, right? Like, it's not that dynamic of environment. There isn't as much technology to oversee. But then when you look at like large multinational organizations, right? You're operating hundreds of domains, and you have like technology partners, not just in the organization, but outside the organization, right? And this is where I often see, the process stuff kind of start to struggle a bit, right? Whether or not it causes either compliance gaps or if you're one of the organizations that miraculously does manage to maintain compliance through a process-driven approach, if you don't sacrifice compliance, you are sacrificing agility, or if not agility, then cost, right? Because there are going to be more manpower. There is more manpower needed associated with this, right? So I guess like in India, like how do we see organizations navigate this stuff, right? Because like at least my experience with operating with Indian organizations, typically historically throwing manpower behind a problem was never an issue, right? But now like throwing manpower behind this type of problem could be an issue, because even though we may have the resources and even may not cost us, it does cost us agility, right? And so I guess like, from what you guys have been seeing in your local market, like do these organizations like, are they kind of going back to their old strategies of like, let's just throw bodies at the problem? Or are they looking at a controls-based approach? Are they trying to leverage automation where they can, stuff like that?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, Jason, they're looking more from a control kind of an approach, right? Why? The reason behind it is India market is a little different. Here, you would see not more legal professional turning into DPOs. They are more CISO people who are getting into a DPO role. So they're already into the IT part of it, the IT re-engineering part of it, and they believe in tools, technologies to help them navigate into, for example, the cybersecurity journeys and all. And these are the same people who are picking up the roles of DPOs, and they also feel that they need technology re-engineering. They need technology to look into this particular problem, right? Probably the compliance, this thing, they don't want to throw people at the problem. Or probably here, it's not more of just creating of the policies and procedures. It's more about, okay, how do I implement this policy and procedure, right? That perspective is there, because here the Chief Information Security Officer is the one who's taking up the role. That's what I'm seeing at a larger or the India picture, right? Definitely, they are looking at, okay, how do I re-engineer and ensure that my piece of process or probably the piece of technology is getting compliant. So that maturity, probably looking at that, looking at the problem from that particular perspective is there. And we are working with lots of organizations wherein CISO is front-ending these particular projects, and they are saying, okay, if I need to re-engineer, right, shall I get a technology from outside or do I build in? So, for example, it's a manufacturing organization or it is a retail e-commerce website, right? And they're not good at that much at the technology front. So they don't think of even building something in-house. They say, okay, what are the best options that I can get outside? Probably it might be something to help me resolve, may or may not be a Forrester rated or a Gartner rated product, but it should be a product that I can trust on and probably have an easy integration with my IT infrastructure and ensure I get this particular compliance piece done, right? And definitely India is not looking from just throwing people at the problem. That kind of approach is definitely not there. And I'm really happy seeing that, okay, it's just not something that's going to be some paper tigers that will be created. People are thinking about, okay, how do I really make this into an implementation process? May it be not only consent piece, but even the retention schedules, right? How do I actually have a technology in place that can help me manage my retention schedules, or probably purge data according to my retention schedule, or even give me some pop-ups. Okay, your data is so redundant, or this is the data that needs to go off. It's off the retention timelines. So yeah, I can see at a large, yeah, it is more of a control-based approach that organizations are even picking up. They don't want to be reactive to a problem. They're becoming proactive and ensuring that the utmost technology that's required, at least to baseline privacy, is in place.
That's really interesting to hear, right? Like, outside the unfortunate commonality on the revenue side, it definitely sounds like the Indian market as it comes online is starting from like, square two, right? Where they've already kind of like worked past all the initial learnings that like we had to go through GDPR, CPRA, whatever else. So, it is going to be pretty exciting to see what happens there in terms of like how fast that market like actually comes into compliance, but also, for the enforcement agencies, right? Like, what do they actually find, right? I guess we'll find out in maybe a year or two. But it is very interesting to see the patterns seem to have built off of each other from like a global market.
Yeah. So even I see one thing that, the organization who are like a fintech or a tech companies, right? They are putting their brains into, okay, how do I create, say example, simple as the governance piece of data privacy, right? Probably how do I automate a DPIA internally? I create a small tool for DPIA. Or probably they're trying to do that, but the other organizations who are more of e-commerce, retail, or your manufacturing, your insurance, these guys are not even thinking about creating of something of their own, because they know they can't. They are not a tech company, but tech companies are giving it a chance that, I can create something in-house, I can build it, I have a tech capability. But when I was talking to a couple of them, right, they just mentioned we tried doing that, and some said, oh, we failed after a point of time, and they said, let's go into market and get something readily available. So that is also something that's there from the absorption perspective, from creating technologies for privacy.
No, yeah, absolutely, right. Like, the one thing we know about the Indian market is full of IT talent, right? But the benefit to, obviously take anything I say with a grain of salt. I am a vendor at the end of the day, right? But like, one of the benefits I would say using a vendor is like we see multiple different organizations across the globe under different requirements, right? So as we build features or use cases into our platform, right, they are probably taking into account things that you don't know if you need now, but you'll realize you need later. And when, it shouldn't be your day job if you are like, say, Tata or something like that, to be thinking about these problems. Your job is managing your business, right? Like selling cars or whatever else, right? Absolutely. So at that point, like, let me do that work for you or whoever, right? But, with that, I think this has been a great discussion. Hopefully we can meet back up maybe in like a year or so after the regulations had a little time to come online and sync and see what it's how it's been acting. But before we go, feel free to tell people where they can find you, anything that any event you guys are going to be at or whatever else. And I think we could wrap up from here.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, looking forward to connecting back with you guys, and probably coming up with the next podcast. Probably I'll connect with Jamie. We want more people to know about the first party cookies, second party cookies, and the others, because there needs lots of light to be thrown there. Probably Jason, probably I would moderate that and ask you all the questions that my client have for those, right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
It was nice connecting.
Yeah, I agree. And this has been a great discussion. Appreciate both your times today. Lots of takeaways. I have about 100 questions I want to ask. So we should definitely get another session going sooner than later. But thanks for all of the insights in this discussion today. We'll have some show notes and a blog to go along with this conversation as well once we launch it. So thank you both again so much, and looking forward to chatting with you both soon.
Sure. Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Bye-bye.